"I don't want a pie," the cowboy said, and set his coins on the counter anyway. "I want to know why someone who bakes like this is hiding in the back of a general store like she's ashamed of it." Eliza Hart looked at him the way a woman looks at a man who has just said something she wasn't prepared for. Not because it was wrong, but because it was exactly right, and nobody had ever said it out loud before. She had been baking since she was 14 years old. She had sold pies to every family in Silver Creek, and not one person in 6 years had ever asked her a single thing about herself. She picked up his coins, she put them in the register, and she said, "You want apple or blackberry?" He smiled like a man who knew he wasn't done yet. Surprise me. If this story is already pulling at something in you, hit subscribe right now and follow along all the way to the end. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Eliza Hart woke up every morning at 4:15. Not because she wanted to, because the bread wouldn't rise if she started any later, and the pies needed 2 hours in the oven before the general store opened at 7. And if the pies weren't ready when Herschel Pruitt unlocked the front door, he would dock her 10 cents per item and smile while he did it, and call it a contractual obligation. She had been waking up at 4:15 for 6 years. She had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a scar. It was simply part of the shape of things, now, the dark and the cold, and the flower and the fire. The rhythm of survival, dressed up as a livelihood. Silver Creek, Colorado, 1882. A mountain town that sat in a valley between two peaks, like something that had fallen there and decided not to get up. 1,200 people. One church, one schoolhouse, one doctor, 2 saloons, and a general store that sold everything from seed to saddles, and since 6 years ago, pies from a girl who lived in the 2 rooms behind the kitchen and paid her rent in pastry. Eliza was 20 years old when she made the arrangement with Herschel Pruitt. She was 26 now, and the arrangement had not changed in any way that benefited her. Herschel sold her pies for 40 cents each and paid her 20. He told his customers the pies were made by his wife's sister, which was a lie, and he told Eliza she was lucky to have the arrangement, which may or may not have been true, depending on the day. She baked because she was good at it. She was good at it because her mother had been good at it, and her mother had taught her the way you teach someone something you love, not as a lesson, but as a conversation, standing side by side at the same table, hands in the same dough, talking about everything and nothing, until the skill became part of the person receiving it. Her mother had been dead for 6 years. Her father for 7. She did not talk about this because there was nobody in Silver Creek who had known her parents, and nobody who had asked about them since the first year, when the asking was still fresh enough to feel like care rather than curiosity. She had learned to be unremarkable. It was a skill of its own kind, the skill of taking up exactly the right amount of space, of being useful without being visible, of answering questions directly so that no further questions were invited. People in Silver Creek knew Eliza Hart the way they knew a reliable piece of furniture, appreciatively and without curiosity. She told herself it was enough. On a Tuesday in early October, she was arranging the morning's pies in the glass case at the front of the store when the door opened and a man walked in who was not from Silver Creek. She knew it immediately, not from how he looked, but from how he moved. People who lived in small mountain towns moved through their own spaces with the specific ease of people who know exactly where everything is. This man moved like someone arriving somewhere new, taking inventory without being obvious about it. The particular attentiveness of a person gathering information about an unfamiliar room. He was tall, dusty from the road. He had the kind of face that had been outdoors for most of its life and had stopped apologizing for it. He looked to be in his early 30s, and he carried himself the way working men carried themselves, not proudly, but with a certain economy, as if he had learned not to waste motion. He looked around the store for a moment, and then he looked at the pie case, and then he looked at Eliza. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. "Can I help you?" He walked to the case and looked at the pies through the glass with the attention of a man who took food seriously. She noticed that. Most people glanced. He actually looked. "Apple," he said. "Yes, also blackberry peach, and this morning I did a brown sugar walnut." He looked up at her. "You made these?" Yes. All of them. This morning. Every morning, she said. He stood there a moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. Not the usual customer expression of mild satisfaction at having found what they came in for. Something more thoughtful than that. "I'll take a slice of the walnut," he said, "and a cup of coffee if you have it." She had it. She cut the slice and poured the coffee and set them on the narrow counter at the side of the case, where Herschel had put 2 stools for customers who wanted to eat in the store, which was not a thing. Herschel had thought of it was a thing Eliza had suggested 2 years ago, and Herschel had implemented and taken credit for without discussion. The man sat down. He ate in silence for a moment. She went back to arranging the case. Then he said, "How long have you been baking?" "Since I was about 12, she said without turning. "And you sell them here?" "I sell them here." "What does Pruitt give you for them?" She turned and looked at him. He was watching her with the same thoughtful expression, eating his pie, like a man with nowhere pressing to be. "Half the sale price," she said. He chewed. He considered. "That's not good math for you." "No," she agreed. "It's not." "Can you sell them somewhere else?" "This is the only store in Silver Creek. What about the saloons?" She hadn't thought about the saloons. She had thought about a great many things in 6 years, but apparently not that one. She looked at him for a second with an expression that was not quite annoyance and not quite gratitude. "I've never tried," she said. "The walnut pie," he said, "is the best thing I've eaten in 6 months on the trail." He said it flatly as a fact, not as a compliment designed to produce a reaction. "You should be making considerably more than half." She picked up a cloth and wiped the already clean counter. "Are you a businessman?" she asked. "No," he said. "A cowboy." "Then with respect, the economics of baking are not really your concern, no?" He agreed easily. "They're not." He finished the last of the pie. He drank the last of the coffee. He put coins on the counter. She noticed he counted out the right amount without being told the price, which meant he'd been paying attention when she set the other customer's change. "What's your name?" he said. "Eliza Hart." "Caleb Boone." He stood up and picked up his hat from the stool beside him. He looked at her one more time with that same direct, unhurried attention. "Thank you for the pie, Miss Hart." "You're welcome, Mr. Boone." He walked out. Eliza stood at the counter and looked at the door for a moment after it closed. She was not a woman given to noticing men. She had been around men her entire adult life. Customers Herschel. The men who came in for supplies and occasionally talked to her because she was there and convenient. And she had gotten very good at the particular skill of being polite without being available, of responding without inviting. She went back to work. She thought about the saloons. She thought about why she had never thought about the saloons. She thought about 40 cents and 20 cents, and the 6 years of that arithmetic adding up in a direction she tried not to look at too carefully. She thought briefly about Caleb Boone. She stopped thinking about him. She had pies to rotate. He came back the next afternoon. This surprised her more than it should have, which surprised her more than she wanted to admit. He sat at the same stool. He ordered coffee and a slice of peach pie. He asked if she had made the bread in the case at the back of the store. She said yes. He asked how long it had taken her to develop the recipe. She looked at him for a moment because nobody had ever asked her about a recipe. People asked for food or they asked for prices. But the question of how something was developed, the question of process and craft and decision, had never been put to her by a customer before. 3 years, she said. And then because he looked genuinely interested, and she was not accustomed to genuine interest, and wasn't sure how to respond to it with anything less than honesty, she told him about the recipe, about the starter she'd been maintaining since her mother taught her, about the 2 ingredients she'd changed and why, about the batch she'd ruined twice before she got the ratio right. He listened. He asked 2 questions. He ate his pie. When he left, she stood at the counter and felt for the second time in as many days the specific unsettling sensation of having been seen by someone who wasn't looking for anything from her, who just looked. She told herself it was nothing. He was passing through. Drifting cowboys passed through Silver Creek twice a month, and she had never given any of them more than the standard 40 cents worth of attention. She rotated the pies. On the third day, he didn't come in the afternoon. He came in the morning just after she'd arranged the case before the other customers arrived. He was carrying a folded piece of paper, and he set it on the counter beside his coffee cup and slid it toward her. She looked at it, then at him. "Open it," he said. She unfolded the paper. It was a list of names, 6 of them with numbers beside each one. She recognized 4 of the names. 2 saloon owners, the hotel manager, the mining company foreman who fed 40 men 3 meals a day. "I spent yesterday afternoon talking to people," Caleb said. "Those are the numbers they told me. What they'd pay per pie per week if someone was selling direct." Eliza stared at the paper. She did the arithmetic without trying to. It was reflexive, the way arithmetic always was when you'd lived at the edge of enough for 6 years. The numbers were more than double what she made from Herschel. More than double. "You did this yesterday," she said slowly. "I had time. You talked to 6 people on my behalf." "I asked 6 people a business question," he said. "That's different." She looked up at him. "Why?" He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He looked at her with the same expression he'd had from the first morning, direct, unhurried, not performing anything. "Because that pie is worth more than you're getting for it," he said. "And because it seemed like nobody had ever told you that before." The store was quiet. Herschel hadn't arrived yet. Outside, Silver Creek was just beginning its morning noise boots on the boardwalk, a wagon, the distant sound of the mine starting up its first shift. Eliza looked at the paper in her hands. She looked at the numbers. She thought about 6 years of 20 cents on the dollar, and the arrangement that never changed, and the smile Herschel gave when he docked her for lateness. And something in her chest moved. Not dramatically, not with the force of revelation, but with the slow cellular movement of something that has been compressed for a long time beginning very cautiously to expand. "I'm not going to pretend this changes everything overnight," she said. "It doesn't have to change everything overnight," Caleb said. "It just has to change one thing." She folded the paper. She held it. She thought about whether she was going to do anything with it, or whether she was going to put it in her apron pocket and then in the drawer in the back room, and then nowhere, the way she'd handled every other piece of information that required her to risk something. She put it in her apron pocket. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Talk to the hotel manager first. He's the easiest one. He's also the most consistent. They serve supper every night, and they need something for dessert that isn't whatever they're currently serving, which apparently is terrible." She looked at him. "How do you know what they're currently serving?" "I'm staying there," he said, and picked up his coffee. He was staying in Silver Creek. He wasn't passing through. The realization landed differently than she expected it to, not with alarm, and that absence of alarm was itself something she noted and set aside for later examination. Herschel arrived 40 minutes later. He looked at Caleb on the stool, at Eliza at the counter, and back at Caleb with the expression of a man who had categorized this situation before he had all the information. "You the drifter who's been taking up my counter the last 3 days," he said to Caleb. "I'm a paying customer," Caleb said pleasantly. "You staying in Silver Creek?" "For now." Herschel looked at Eliza. She looked back at him with the expression she'd developed specifically for Herschel, composed professionally neutral, giving him nothing to work with. He went to his side of the store. Caleb finished his coffee and left. That afternoon, Eliza walked to the Silver Creek Hotel. The manager's name was Tom Darby, and he was a man of 50 who had been in the hospitality business long enough to know quality when it was presented to him. She brought one pie, the brown sugar walnut, and set it on his desk, and said without preamble, "I make these. I'd like to discuss whether you'd be interested in a weekly order." Tom Darby looked at the pie. He looked at her. He cut a piece without being asked and ate it standing at his desk, and then said, "I can take 4 a week. What's your price?" She named the price from Caleb's list. Tom didn't blink. He stuck out his hand. She walked back to the general store with a handshake agreement and a weekly order that would add more to her income than 6 months of Herschel's half prices. and she stood in the back room with her flour-covered hands and her heart running considerably faster than usual, and felt for the first time in a very long time something she did not immediately try to press down. She felt it, she held it, she let it be what it was. When Caleb came in the next morning, she told him. Not emotionally, just the facts, the handshake, the numbers. He listened and nodded and said, "Good. Now talk to the mining foreman. He'll want to negotiate, but his starting offer is always low. Don't take the first number." She looked at him across the counter. "You negotiated before," she said. "I've bought and sold cattle for 15 years, he said. "The first number is always a test." "Why are you helping me?" she said. It came out more directly than she'd planned, but she'd been carrying the question for 4 days, and it was beginning to feel dishonest not to ask it. Caleb set his coffee cup down. He looked at her with that look she was getting, to know the one that did not hurry, did not perform, did not manage the impression it was making. "Because I walked in here 4 days ago and you were selling the best pie in 3 states for 20 cents on the dollar," he said. "And you looked like a woman who had accepted that as just the way things were. And I can't walk past that without saying something. I'm not built that way." She held his gaze. She thought about whether this was something she should trust, or something she should be careful about. She had spent 6 years being careful about things, and careful had kept her fed and housed and exactly where she started. "I'm going to talk to the foreman tomorrow," she said. "Good," he said. She talked to the foreman. She did not take the first number. She brought home a second weekly order that was 2 numbers above the starting offer, and not quite as high as Caleb's list, but close enough that she walked back to the store in the October air with something she could only describe as momentum. The unfamiliar, slightly frightening sensation of a life moving in a direction she had chosen. Herschel noticed. He noticed the way small men notice when the thing they have undervalued begins to have value elsewhere, not because they regret the undervaluing, but because they dislike the redistribution of advantage. He came to her the following Monday morning with his hands in his pockets and his proprietary smile, and said, "I hear you've been selling outside the store." "My baking time is my own," Eliza said without stopping what she was doing. "The hours I work for you, I work for you. The hours I don't, I don't. Our arrangement covers what I make during store hours," she said. "I checked. You never wrote it differently." Herschel was quiet for a moment. "I could change the arrangement." Eliza set down her rolling pin and looked at him. Directly. Without the managed neutrality she'd been using on him for 6 years, but with something she hadn't used on him before, the particular directness of a woman who has recently discovered that her work is worth considerably more than she has been accepting for it. "You could," she said. "And I could take my 4:15 mornings and my hotel order and my mining company order and the 2 saloons I haven't spoken to yet and find a different place to sell from." She paused. "I've been here 6 years, Herschel. You've made a great deal of money from my 20 cents. Herschel looked at her. The proprietary smile was gone. 30 cents, he said. 35, she said. He left without answering. He came back an hour later and said, 35, and held out his hand. She shook it. She was washing pie tins in the back room when she heard the store door open, and she didn't need to look to know it was Caleb she had, without intending to develop a specific awareness of the sound of him moving through the store, the pace and weight of it distinct from every other customer. He came to the doorway of the back room. She told him what had happened with Herschel. His face did something that she was beginning to recognize as his version of satisfaction, contained brief, more genuine for being undramatic. 35 is fair, he said. I know, she said. I could have pushed for 40. Why didn't you? She thought about it honestly. Because I still live here, she said. And 35 keeps the peace better than 40, and the peace is worth something. He looked at her. That's good thinking, he said. Not patronizing, just the same flat acknowledgement of competence she'd heard him use with the hardware assessment he'd made about the stool on his first visit, the same register. Factual. Respectful. She went back to washing tins. He got his own coffee from the pot she had told him on day 4 he could do that, and he did it every morning now without asking and leaned against the doorframe. How long have you been alone? He asked. She went still for a second. Just a second. She finished the tin she was washing before she answered. 6 years, she said. Since your family. Yes. He was quiet. I'm sorry, he said. And it was the kind of sorry that wasn't asking for more information. It was just the acknowledgement of a weight placed beside her without expectation. She dried the tin. She picked up the next one. How long have you been drifting? She asked. Since I was 22, he said. 10 years. Do you have family? A brother in Texas. We write twice a year. He paused. We're not close. We're not estranged. We just went different directions and kept going. She looked at him over her shoulder. What keeps you moving? He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive thinking. She was learning the difference. I keep thinking the next place will have something the last one didn't, he said. I haven't figured out what I'm looking for yet, which probably means I'm looking for the wrong thing. She turned back to the tin. What do you mean? I mean, maybe the thing I'm looking for isn't a place, he said. Simply without any particular weight, the way he said most things that turned out to carry considerable weight. Maybe I've been pointing in the wrong direction. She didn't say anything. She washed the last tin. She set it on the drying rack. She picked up the cloth, and she thought about a man who walked in 4 days ago and ordered a slice of walnut pie and spent his afternoon talking to 6 strangers so that she could know what her work was worth. And she thought about the fact that he was still here. And she thought about what it meant that she had stopped at some point in the last 4 days without making a decision about it, bracing for him to leave. She thought about that for a long time after he went back to the store. She thought about it while she made the afternoon pies. She thought about it while she did the numbers in the small ledger she kept in the drawer, the one that now had 3 columns instead of 1. She thought about it at 4:15 the next morning when she was at the table with her hands in the dough and the dark outside and the fire lit, and the particular solitude of that hour felt for the first time she could remember not like the absence of something, but like the space before something arrived. She pressed the dough. She told herself she was imagining things. She had told herself she was imagining things before. She had always been right. She pressed the dough and told herself to pay attention to what was in front of her and not what might be coming. And the dough did not care about any of it. And rose, the way it always rose, and came out the way it always came out. And by 6:30, the pies were in the oven. And by 7, they were cooling. And by 7:15, the store was open. And at 7:20, the door opened, and Caleb Boone came in and said, "Morning, Miss Hart." And she said, "Morning, Mr. Boone." And she poured his coffee before he asked, and neither of them said anything about the fact that she'd poured it before he asked. Some things she was learning did not need to be said to be true. The knowing of them was enough. The keeping of them close, careful, honest, the not running from them and the not pressing toward them, either just the allowing of what was real to simply be real, that was a new skill, and she was only at the beginning of learning it. But she was learning. For the first time in 6 years, she was learning something other than how to survive, and that she thought as she watched him sit at his stool and wrap his hands around his cup. The way he did every morning was the most terrifying and the most alive she had felt since she was 20 years old. And her mother was still alive, and the world still held the possibility of things she hadn't yet imagined. She went back to work. She did not press the feeling down. The 2 saloons were not the same kind of problem. The first one, the Silver Spur, was run by a man named Pete Aldrich, who was pragmatic about money, in the way of men who had learned that sentiment was expensive and practicality paid the rent. Eliza walked in on a Wednesday morning before the noon crowd set a blackberry pie on the bar and told him her price. Pete cut a slice, ate it in 4 bites, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said, "3 a week, same price." He stuck out his hand before she finished nodding. The second saloon was the problem. The copper rail was owned by a man named Silas Greer, and Silas Greer was the kind of man who made every transaction personal because he believed that making things personal gave him an edge. He was 45, broad across the shoulders, and had the specific quality of a man who had spent years being the largest presence in whatever room he occupied and had mistaken that for authority. He looked at the pie she brought in, and then looked at her in a way that made the pie irrelevant, and said, "I heard you've been making the rounds. Thought I was going to be last." "You're not last," Eliza said. "I came to both saloons the same week. Pete Aldrich get a better price." Pete Aldrich got the same price. Silas leaned on the bar with both forearms and looked at her, the way he looked at things he was deciding whether to acquire. "I'll tell you what. You give me a better price than Pete, and I'll put your name on the board. Eliza Hart's Pies. People will ask for you by name." "People already ask for me by name," she said, which was becoming truer every day. "My price is the same for everyone." "That's not how negotiating works, sweetheart." "I'm not your sweetheart," she said, "and that is exactly how my pricing works." She picked up the pie. "I can come back when you've had time to think about it." She walked out with the pie under her arm and Silas Greer staring at her back, and she did not let herself feel the slight tremor in her hands until she was half a block away and certain nobody was watching. She told Caleb that evening. He was at the store counter near closing time, and she gave him the Pete Aldrich news first, and he nodded, and then she told him about Silas Greer. His face did not change dramatically, but she had gotten good enough at reading him to catch the slight shift, something that went from neutral to attentive, in a way that had a quiet edge. "He called you sweetheart," Caleb said. "Men like Silas Greer call everyone sweetheart," she said. "It's a management technique. Did it rattle you?" She considered being dishonest about this. She decided not to. A little. Not enough to change anything. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You handled it right," he said. "Walking out with the pie was exactly correct. He'll come to you." "How do you know?" "Because you walked out instead of folding, and men like Greer can't stand being walked out on. He'll spend 2 days being stubborn about it, and then his pride will tip over into curiosity, and he'll want to know why you didn't fold." He picked up his coffee. "When he comes back, let him think he's winning. Agree to put his order through the store instead of direct, let Herschel take the split, which is still better than nothing, and tell Greer you're doing him a favor by keeping it simple." Eliza looked at him. "You've dealt with men like Silas Greer before." "I've dealt with men like Silas Greer my entire life," Caleb said. "In cattle and land in every town between here and the Texas border. They all have the same operating principle they need to feel like they won." He looked at her. "So let him feel like he won. You'll have the money either way." She thought about this. "That feels like dishonesty." "It's not dishonesty," Caleb said. "It's allowing a man to keep his dignity while you take the outcome you need. Those are different things." She turned that over. She thought about Herschel and the 35 cents she had done something similar there, she realized. Let him feel the concession was his to make. "You're better at people than you let on," she said. "Cattle and people aren't that different," he said. "You learn to read what something needs to feel safe, and then you give it that, and everything else follows easier." She looked at him across the counter for a moment. "Is that what you're doing with me?" she said. "Reading what I need to feel safe." It came out before she'd decided to say it. She felt the directness of it land between them, and she held her ground instead of qualifying it, which took more effort than she wanted to admit. Caleb set his coffee cup down slowly. He looked at her with that look, the one that did not hurry and did not perform, and she noticed that he thought before he answered, which was something she had filed in the growing catalog of things about him that she trusted. "No," he said. "With you, I'm just saying what's true, and letting you do whatever you want with it." He paused. "You don't need managing. You need information. Those are two completely different things, and most people never bother to know the difference." The store was empty around them. Herschel had gone home an hour ago. The evening had settled over Silver Creek in that particular mountain way, fast and complete, the temperature dropping the moment the light did. "Why did you stay?" she asked. "In Silver Creek." "Good coffee," he said. She waited. He looked at the counter for a moment. Then he looked at her. "Because something I was looking for might be here," he said. And I'd like to know if I'm right before I move on. And if you are right, then I stop moving, he said, simply without dramatics, as if stopping after 10 years of motion were a small and ordinary thing to consider. She picked up her cloth. She had a habit she was beginning to notice of picking up the cloth when she needed something to do with her hands during conversations that required steadiness. You should know, she said, that I'm not very good at this. At what? At whatever this is. She kept her voice even. I've been alone for 6 years. I've gotten very efficient at it. I don't know what I'd be like if I weren't. What does efficient mean to you? She thought about it. It means I know exactly what I need and I get it. I know what I can manage and I stay inside it. I don't require things I can't rely on. She paused. It means I haven't hoped for anything in a long time. Because hoping for things that don't come is expensive. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. That's not efficiency, he said gently. That's armor. She stopped moving the cloth. They look the same from the inside, he said. But they're different. Efficiency saves you work. Armor saves you pain. He held her gaze. The problem with armor is it doesn't let anything in, even when the thing coming is worth letting in. The quiet stretched between them. Outside, someone walked past the store window. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Silver Creek continued doing what it did every evening, existing indifferently around its own small life. And Eliza stood behind the counter of the general store at 26 years old and felt the armor Caleb had just named sitting on her chest, real and specific in a way it had never been before. Someone said the word for it out loud. "Good night, Mr. Boone," she said. Her voice was steady. "Good night, Miss Hart," he said, and picked up his hat and left. She stood in the empty store for 3 minutes after the door closed. She stood there long enough for the fire in the stove to shift and settle, and for the lamp to flicker once. Then she went to the back room and sat at her table and looked at her ledger with its 3 columns and did not do the arithmetic for once because numbers were not the thing that needed her attention. Silas Greer came back on Friday. Not to the store, he sent a boy with a note. The note said he'd take 2 pies a week through the store if she added a 3rd item. She sent the boy back with a counteroffer, 2 pies a week through the store, and she'd add a seasonal item starting next month. Greer sent the boy back again, agreed. Eliza gave the boy a nickel and a slice of leftover peach pie for his trouble. And the boy looked at her like she was the most reasonable person he'd ever encountered, which she suspected was a low bar in Silas Greer's employment. She told Caleb about it the next morning. He didn't say "I told you so." He just said, "The seasonal item was a good move. Keeps him interested without committing you to anything fixed." He drank his coffee. "You're a fast learner." "I've had to be," she said. "That's different from wanting to be," he said. "You're not learning this because you have to. You're learning it because you like it." She opened her mouth to disagree and then realized she couldn't. She did like it. She liked the negotiation, the problem of it, the way a conversation could be, a kind of construction. Each word placed deliberately, the whole thing built toward something. It was not so different from baking. The ingredients mattered. The order mattered. The patience mattered. "You're right," she said, which was becoming a thing she said to Caleb Boone with increasing frequency. "I usually am," he said. She looked at him sharply. "I'm joking," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in the way she'd learned was his version of a smile contained brief more genuine for being rare. She felt the laugh before she made it a real one. Sudden gone as quickly as it arrived, and she put her hand over her mouth 1 second too late, and Caleb looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something warmer and less managed than his usual careful attention, and neither of them said anything about that either. Herschel noticed. Of course Herschel noticed. Herschel had a talent for noticing the things that most directly threatened the existing arrangement. He came to her the following Monday with the proprietary smile back in place and said, "That Cowboy's in here every morning." "He's a paying customer," Eliza said. She was rolling dough and she did not stop. "He stays an awful long time for coffee and pie." "Herschel," she kept rolling, "is there something you actually want to say?" I'm just observing, Herschel said. Then observe quietly, she said. I have work to do. He left. She finished the dough. She did not examine the irritation she felt at Herschel for the implication at herself for caring that he'd implied it, at the whole architecture of a world where a woman having a regular customer was something that required management. She examined it later alone in the back room at noon, and what she found under the irritation was something that made her set her coffee cup down and sit very still. She was protecting this. What she had with Caleb in the mornings, the coffee, the conversation, the specific quality of being known without being managed. She was protecting it, the way she protected her starter culture, the way she protected the recipe in her head that she'd never written down, as if it were something fragile and essential that casual handling could ruin. That was not the behavior of a woman who was indifferent to a man. She picked up her coffee. She told herself to be careful. Careful had served her for 6 years. Careful had kept her fed and housed. Careful was a proven and reliable system. She was less and less convinced it was enough. 2 weeks after Caleb Boone had first walked through the door of the Silver Creek General Store, a man arrived in town that nobody expected. He came on the Thursday afternoon stage, and he went directly to the hotel, and he asked for the manager, and Tom Darby came out and shook the man's hand, and they talked in the lobby for 20 minutes. Eliza didn't know any of this until Friday morning when Tom Darby came into the store before she'd finished arranging the case. I need to talk to you, Tom said. He had the expression of a man carrying news he hadn't fully sorted yet. What's wrong? She said. Nothing's wrong. There's a man at my hotel, Marcus Webb. He came in from Denver yesterday. Tom paused. He's a buyer. Food distribution. He's got contracts with 6 hotels in Denver and 4 in Colorado Springs, and he's looking to add suppliers. He looked at her. He ate one of your pies last night at supper. He came and found me this morning and asked who made it. Eliza stood very still. What did you tell him? I told him your name, Tom said. He wants to meet you, today if possible. The back room felt smaller suddenly. She pressed both hands flat on the counter. She thought about Denver. She thought about contracts. She thought about what a contract with Denver hotels would mean in numbers, not the numbers she had, now the careful, manageable numbers of the 3-column ledger, but numbers she hadn't let herself consider because they had seemed so far outside the edges of what was possible that thinking about them had felt like a kind of delusion. What time? She said. He said, whenever you're available. This afternoon? She said. After the lunch rush. Tom nodded and left. Eliza turned back to the case and stood there for a moment, with her hands not quite steady, and then she heard the door and knew it was Caleb before she turned around. He read her face immediately. What happened? She told him. His expression went through the same rapid internal movement she'd seen when she'd told him about the Silas Greer situation, quick assessing landing on something that looked very much like contained excitement. Marcus Webb, he said, from Denver. You know him. I know of him. He supplies the Beaumont Hotel Group. They're the largest hotel chain between Denver and San Francisco. He looked at her. Eliza, this is not a small thing. She heard her name. He had called her Eliza before once or twice, the name slipping in where Miss Hart usually was, but today it had a different weight. The way a name has weight when the person using it is telling you they see exactly what is happening to you, and they want you to see it too. I don't know what he's looking for, she said. He's looking for reliable quality at volume. Can you produce at volume? She thought honestly. With more kitchen space, yes. With the current setup, I'm at my limit. Then the question you need to answer before you walk into that meeting is what would it take to scale up? He was already thinking forward. She could see it. Do you know anyone with kitchen space they're not using? She thought. The church had a large kitchen that sat empty 6 days a week. The schoolhouse had a kitchen for events. Neither of those was a real solution, but the question itself opened something. It turned the problem from impossible to merely complicated, and complicated was a territory she had learned to work in. I need to think, she said. You have until this afternoon, he said. That's enough time. You're very calm about this. One of us should be, he said. And there it was again, that almost smile, and she felt it in the specific way she was beginning to feel all of his small moments of warmth, the way you feel sunlight when you've been indoors a long time. She spent the morning baking and thinking. By noon, she had a number in her head, the number she would need for kitchen space for supplies, at volume for the first month before revenue came in. It was not a comfortable number. It was the kind of number that required trust in a future that didn't exist yet. She met Marcus Webb at 2 p.m. in the hotel dining room. He was a compact man of 45, with the efficient manner of someone who traveled constantly and had learned to make decisions quickly because slow decisions were expensive in his business. He shook her hand like she was a business person, which she noted with the specific gratitude of a woman who had spent 6 years being treated as an appendage of someone else's enterprise. "Your pie," Marcus Webb said, "is the best thing I've eaten since I left Denver. I mean that practically not as a compliment." "Thank you," she said. "What does practically mean in your business?" He looked at her with a slight upward adjustment of his assessment. He had expected she guessed someone more deferential. "It means I want to put it in front of my hotel clients and have them order it again, which is the only metric that matters in my business." He put his hands on the table. "I'm looking for 2 varieties, minimum 3 dozen per variety per week, delivered to the stage depot here by Thursday evening for Friday transport to Denver. Can you do that?" She did the math. 72 pies a week. Her current capacity was 30. She would need more than church kitchens. She would need her own space. "Give me a week to confirm the production side," she said. "I can tell you the price today." She told him the price. He didn't blink, which told her the price was right. He told her he'd be in Silver Creek until Sunday. She told him she'd have an answer by Saturday. They shook hands again, and she walked out of the hotel into the October air and stood on the boardwalk and did the arithmetic that she'd been refusing to let herself do since Tom Darby walked into the store that morning. 72 pies a week, at her price, per month, per year. It was not a supplemental income. It was a business, a real one, independent of Herschel Pruitt and Silas Greer and every other man who had decided what her work was worth before she had a say in it. She went back to the store. Caleb was gone. He was gone most afternoons. She had learned doing whatever a man did when he wasn't drifting and wasn't yet settled the interim life of someone between one version of himself and the next. She went to the back room and sat at her table and looked at her ledger and thought about 72 pies and her own kitchen and the specific kind of fear that was indistinguishable from the beginning of courage. She was still there when the store closed, and Herschel went home, and the evening came in, and she was still there when she heard the door and Caleb's footsteps, and she said without looking up, "I need to find kitchen space." He came to the doorway. "I know," he said. She looked up. "Do you have a solution?" He leaned against the door frame, with an expression she hadn't seen before, not the careful attention, not the almost smile. Something that had made a decision before she was in the room. "I've been looking at the Henderson property," he said. "The old freighting office on Sycamore Street. It's been empty for 2 years. The kitchen is large. It was used for feeding freight crews. The owner's in Denver, and he's been trying to sell for 18 months. She stared at him. "You've been looking at property." "For about a week." "You've been looking at property in Silver Creek for a week," she said, "which means you were looking at it before Marcus Webb arrived, before any of this." She stopped. She recalibrated. "Why?" Caleb looked at her steadily. He said, "Because I could see where this was going before you let yourself see it. And I wanted to know what was available if it got there." The room was very quiet. "Caleb," she said, and his name in her mouth felt different from what she had practiced. It felt like something she had been holding at arm's length and was only now bringing close enough to examine. "What are you doing?" "I'm telling you that the Henderson property can be leased for less than you think," he said, "and that the owner will take a short-term arrangement if approached correctly, and that your problem of scaling up has a solution that doesn't require you to ask Herschel for anything." He kept his eyes on hers. "That's what I'm doing." "That's not what I meant," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. But I think that question is one we should answer when you're not also trying to decide whether to take a meeting with a Denver distributor. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about armor and efficiency and the 6 years of carefully managed distance. She thought about what it meant that he'd spent a week looking at property in a town he'd only been in for 2 weeks, and what it meant that she felt something she could only describe as known. Saturday, she said. I have to answer Webb by Saturday. We deal with that first. Agreed, he said. And then... She stopped. She looked at him with the direct honesty that she had learned from him that he had modeled for her every single morning for 2 weeks over coffee and pie, and conversations that had rearranged something fundamental in her understanding of what she was allowed to want. And then we deal with the other question, she said. Something in him settled. The way he settled when something he had believed would happen had happened. Saturday, he said. One thing at a time. She looked down at her ledger. She looked at the 3 columns. She thought about a 4th column she hadn't opened yet. Not income, not expenses, not margins, but something that didn't have a name in any accounting system she knew. Something that started, she was beginning to understand, with choosing not to do the thing alone. She had been alone for 6 years. She had been very, very good at it. She was beginning to suspect that was exactly the problem. On Friday morning, Eliza went to the Henderson property alone. She had told herself she was going to look at it practically as a space, as a set of dimensions and conditions, as a problem with a potential solution. She was not going to think about the fact that Caleb Boone had spent a week researching it before she knew it existed. She was not going to think about what that meant. She was going to look at the kitchen and assess the ovens and walk the floor space and come back with numbers. She did all of that. The caretaker let her in, and she walked through the building with the practiced eye of a woman who had spent 6 years making the most of a kitchen that was too small and too shared. And what she found was the space was large enough to triple her current output. There were 2 industrial ovens, old but functional. The work tables were solid. The storage was deep. There was a side door to the street that was wide enough for deliveries. She stood in the middle of that kitchen for 3 minutes and let herself feel the size of it. Then she went back to the store and made the morning pies, and did not mention the visit to anyone. Caleb came in at his usual time. He poured his own coffee. He sat at his stool. He looked at her and said, "You went." "How did you know?" "Because you came back looking like someone who has seen something they want and are trying to convince themselves they don't," he said. She set down her rolling pin. "The ovens are old." "They work," he said. "I asked the caretaker. The lease is negotiable. I have the owner's contact in Denver. We can send a letter today and have an answer by Wednesday." She looked at him. "You already know what I should do." "I know what the numbers say," he said. "What you should do is your decision." She turned back to the dough. She worked it for a moment in silence. "The number I need," she said. "To start. First month's lease supplies at volume 2 additional ovens if the old ones need replacing. I've been calculating." She paused. "It's more than I have." "How much more?" she told him. Caleb was quiet for the moment. He drank his coffee. He set the cup down with the careful deliberateness of a man making a decision he'd already made, but was choosing the right moment to present. "I have that," he said. She turned and looked at him fully. "No." "It's not charity." "No," she said again. "I won't start something real by owing it to someone else. I spent 6 years cleaning that particular kind of debt off my account with Herschel Pruitt. I'm not replacing it with a different one. It would be an investment," Caleb said. "Not a loan. I take a percentage of the Denver contract revenue until the initial amount is returned, and then I'm out. Standard business arrangement." He held her gaze. "I've done it twice before with cattle operations. It's paper. It's clean. It has nothing to do with anything except math." She looked at him. She thought about the armor. She thought about what he had said, that armor and efficiency looked the same from the inside, and she thought about the fact that her immediate refusal had been so fast it hadn't involved any actual thinking, just the reflex of a woman who had learned that depending on anyone cost more than it was worth. Let me think about it, she said. That's all I asked, he said. She thought about it all day. She thought about it while she rotated the morning pies and served the lunch customers and counted the afternoon till. She thought about it in the specific way she thought about hard things, not in circles, but in a straight line following each consequence to its next one, seeing where the chain led. The chain led here. The Henderson kitchen was the difference between a small operation that survived and a real business that grew. Marcus Webb's contract was the difference between making enough and building something. And the gap between where she was and where those things began was exactly the number Caleb had offered to provide. She had two options: take the help and build the thing, or stay where she was and keep being careful. She knew which one her mother would have told her to take. She also knew which one the 6 years of armor version of herself was screaming at her to take. The problem was, they were opposite choices. Caleb was at the hotel that evening. She had never gone to find him before. It had always been him coming to her at the store on her territory in the space she controlled. Walking to the hotel felt like a deliberate crossing of something, and she crossed it anyway because she had decided that acting only when she was comfortable was just another word for not acting. She found him in the hotel's small sitting room off the lobby, reading something. He looked up when she came in, and he did not look surprised, which either meant he'd expected her, or he was better at hiding surprise than anyone she'd met. "Tell me what the agreement would look like," she said. "In writing," he told her. He walked her through it, precisely the percentage, the period, the exit clause that returned full ownership of the revenue to her the moment the initial sum was repaid. No interest, no extension clauses. Nothing that could be used to extend leverage beyond the original agreement. She listened to all of it. She asked 4 questions. His answers were exact, and came without elaboration that she hadn't asked for, which was the answer she had been most afraid of not getting. "All right," she said. "I'll send the letter to the Henderson owner tomorrow, and I'll meet with Webb on Saturday with a yes." Caleb nodded. "Good." She stood up to go. She stopped. She sat back down and looked at him with the directness she had been practicing and said, "I told you there was a second question, the one we were going to deal with after Saturday." He set down what he'd been reading. He gave her his full attention. "I need to ask it now," she said, "because I can't think about the business clearly until I know what I'm thinking about when I think about you. And right now, I'm thinking about you constantly, which is making the business thinking very difficult." Something shifted in his face. Not the almost smile, something more open than that. Something she hadn't seen on him before because she suspected he hadn't let it be seen very often. "All right," he said. "Ask. Why are you still in Silver Creek?" "I told you. You told me something might be here that you were looking for," she said. "I want to know what the something is. Specifically." He looked at her for a moment. "You," he said. "Specifically." The word landed in the quiet room, and neither of them moved. Eliza had known on some level that this was what he would say. She was not a woman who misread situations that were this clearly drawn. But knowing a thing was coming and hearing it said were two different events entirely. "You've known me 3 weeks, she said. "I know," he said. "That's not long enough." "I know that too," he said. "I'm not asking you for anything tonight, Eliza. I'm just answering your question. You asked me to be specific. That is the specific answer." He held her gaze. "What you do with it is entirely your business." She looked at him. She thought about the woman she had been 3 weeks ago, the woman who poured coffee and counted tips, and pressed her feelings flat, and called the resulting shape of her life efficiency. She thought about the woman she was right now, sitting in a hotel sitting room she had never been in before, having walked there of her own deliberate will to have a conversation she had chosen to have. They were not the same woman. 3 weeks had not made them the same woman, and she could not entirely account for the distance between them. She stood up. "Saturday," she said. "We deal with the business, and then we deal with this." "That's twice you've said that," he said. "I know. I'm consistent." "You're methodical," he said. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Consistent means you repeat what you've done. Methodical means you know exactly what comes next, and you're working toward it. He looked at her. You know what comes next. She looked at him for a moment. She turned and walked out without answering. She walked back to the store through the cold October night and let herself in, and stood in the back room and put her hands flat on the work table and breathed. He was right. She knew what came next. She had known what came next since about day 5, which was the thing she had been pressing down with considerable effort while she dealt with Pete Aldrich and Silas Greer and Tom Darby and Marcus Webb and 35 Cents and Henderson Kitchens. She was done pressing things down. She was making a note of that. She wrote it at the bottom of the ledger page in the margin where numbers usually lived, done pressing things down. It looked strange there in the column of careful arithmetic. It looked, she thought, exactly right. Saturday came. She met Marcus Webb at 10 in the morning and told him yes. He pulled a contract from his jacket, he had prepared it already, which told her he'd been confident she would agree. Which told her he wanted this more than he'd shown, which was useful information. She read every line. She asked about 2 clauses. He amended one of them without argument, which told her he'd padded it, expecting negotiation. She signed the amended version. They shook hands. He left on the Sunday stage with a contract in his case, and she was left standing in Tom Darby's lobby as the official supplier of pies to the Beaumont Hotel Group's Colorado properties. She walked back to the store. She told Herschel she would be ending the portion of their arrangement that covered the hotel and mining company accounts effective the 1st of November, since those customers would be handled directly from her new premises. Herschel opened his mouth. She added before he could speak that the store arrangement for the Silver Creek sales would continue at 35 cents, which was more than he could replace quickly, and they both knew it. He closed his mouth. She sent the letter to the Henderson property owner. And then she was done with the business for the day, which meant it was time for the second thing. She found Caleb at the stable, which was where he went in the afternoons he helped with the horses, in exchange for his own horses boarding, a practical arrangement that said everything about how he had been living his life for 10 years. She had never come to find him at the stable before either. She was getting better at crossing the territories she'd avoided. He was brushing down a bay horse when she came in. He looked at her. He read her face the way he always did, fast and without fuss. "How did it go with Webb?" he said. "Done," she said. "Signed this morning." "Good." He kept brushing. "I sent the letter to Henderson's owner." "Good." One more stroke. He set the brush down and turned to face her fully, which told her he understood that this was the other conversation. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I told you that before. I meant it." "I know you meant it," he said. I haven't let anyone close in 6 years," she said. "And the reason is not because nobody tried. The reason is because I got very good at keeping people far enough away that they could never become something I relied on." She paused. "Because things you rely on can be taken." "Yes," he said. "They can." "That's not a comforting response," she said. "No?" He agreed. "But you didn't come here for comfort. You came here because you decided something and you're going to say it." She looked at him across the space of the stable in the smell of hay and horse and cold mountain air, and thought about the 4:15 mornings and the 3-column ledger and the way she had said his name last night, and meant something by it that couldn't be taken back. "I don't want to keep keeping you at a distance," she said. "I think I was before. Deliberately. I think I've been—" She searched for the word and found his armor-plating every conversation we've had just enough that I could tell myself it wasn't what it was. She looked directly at him. "It was what it was. I know what it was." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. He said, "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to stop pretending I'm not thinking about you every time you walk out that door," she said. "I want to stop pretending the business is the only reason I care whether you stay in Silver Creek. I want—" She stopped. She started again. "I want to know if what you said last night, the specific thing you said, is the kind of thing a man says or the kind of thing a man means." He walked toward her. Not fast, the same unhurried pace he used for everything. He stopped close enough that she could have reached out, and that was a choice she was aware of making and not making. "I don't say things I don't mean," he said. "You've known that since about day 3. She had known it since about day 2, actually. "Then what do we do?" she said. "We take it at the pace you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. The Henderson lease gives you 6 months of reason to stay in Silver Creek, and I've got more reason than that." He looked at her steadily. "I've been drifting for 10 years because there was nothing that felt like a reason to stop. There is now. That's not pressure, it's just what's true." She thought about all the ways she could qualify what she was feeling. She thought about all the language she had available for keeping something at arm's length while appearing to engage with it. She had gotten very good at that language, and she set it down deliberately. "I'm afraid," she said. "I want to be honest about that." "I know," he said. "I'm afraid of needing something and having it disappear." "I know that too." "It doesn't change what I want," she said. "No," he said. "It doesn't. That's the part that matters." She looked at him. She said, "Caleb." "Yes." "Stay," she said. "Not just while the lease sorts out. Not just while the Denver contract settles. Stay because you want to." She paused. "I'm asking." He looked at her with that warm, open expression she had seen only once before in the hotel sitting room, the one he didn't usually let out. "I already decided to stay," he said. "I was waiting for you to want me to." She exhaled slowly. Something in her chest that had been braced for years, not just since her parents died, but since before that, since she'd learned that the world did not hold things open for you, that you had to grip everything tightly or lose it, that thing loosened. Not entirely. Not with any drama. Just the first half-turn of something very long, wound very tight. She said, "I should get back. I have the afternoon pies." "All right," he said. He picked up the brush. He turned back to the horse, and just before she walked out, he said without turning, "Eliza." "Yes," she said. "You're not bad at this," he said. "You're just new at wanting something you're allowed to have." She walked back to the store. She went to the back room. She stood at her table and started the afternoon dough, and thought about what he'd said, and thought about how accurately it named the thing she hadn't been able to name herself. And she thought with a clarity that surprised her by how complete it was. "I trust this man." Not because he had spent 3 weeks being trustworthy, though he had. Not because the numbers worked and the agreements were fair and the logic was sound, though all of that was true. But because when she looked at the difference between who she had been at the start of October and who she was right now, the direction of the change was toward something better, larger, more honest. People moved you in directions. She had been moved in 3 weeks further toward herself than 6 years of careful survival had managed. That was worth something. That was worth more than careful. She pressed the dough. She worked it with her whole weight. She thought about 4,000 miles of contracts and a kitchen the size of something real, and a man who had stopped drifting because of her specifically, and she thought, "I am not surviving anymore." She did not say it out loud. She didn't need to. It was simply true the way all the best things were true, quietly, completely, without requiring anyone else's permission. The letter from the Henderson owner came back on Wednesday. He would take a 12-month lease at the price Caleb had estimated, with an option to purchase at the end of the term. She read the letter twice, sitting at her table, and then she wrote back yes, without sitting on it for 3 days, the way the old Eliza would have. She signed the lease on Friday. Caleb witnessed it. On the way back from the property office, he said, "You signed that fast." "I knew what I wanted," she said. He looked at her. "That's new," he said. "It's getting less new every day," she said. They were walking side by side on the boardwalk of Silver Creek in the cold, bright Colorado morning, and it was ordinary, and it was not ordinary at all, and she did not press the feeling down, and it did not kill her, and it turned out to be as she had been very slowly, very carefully, very stubbornly, learning the kind of thing that if you let it grew. 3 days later, Herschel Pruitt made his move. She should have seen it coming. 6 years of working for the man had taught her his patterns, and she had stopped watching them. She had gotten comfortable. which was, she realized afterward, the first mistake. The second mistake was underestimating how much Herschel had been making from her arrangement, and how unwilling he was to lose it without attempting to recapture it. He came to her on Monday morning with a man she didn't know. A lawyer from Pueblo. It emerged a man named Garrett Church, with a leather case and a practiced expression of neutral authority. They sat down at Herschel's side of the store, and Herschel said with the proprietary smile she had last seen when he proposed the 35-cent arrangement, "Eliza, I need you to look at something." Garrett Church opened his leather case and produced a document. He set it on the counter between them. "This is the original agreement between yourself and Mr. Pruitt," he said. "Signed in 1876. She looked at it. She had signed it at 20 years old on her third day in Silver Creek, out of desperation that she had since learned to call by its right name. She remembered the pen being put in her hand before she finished reading. "The exclusivity clause," Church said, and pointed to the third paragraph. Eliza read it. She read it twice. The language was dense, but she got there. The clause said that products developed in the store kitchen during the term of employment were the intellectual property of the store. She had developed the recipes in the store kitchen. She had baked in the store kitchen for 6 years. Under the reading, Herschel was putting on this document everything she made, every recipe, every formulation, every variation she had built into the most reliable inventory of pies in 3 counties belonged to Herschel Pruitt. The Henderson lease, the Webb contract, everything she had just set in motion, it rested on those recipes. And if those recipes belonged to Herschel, she had nothing but a kitchen and a distribution deal with no product to fill it. She kept her face completely still. She had gotten very good at that. She read the clause a third time. "I'll need to review this with someone," she said. "Of course," Church said smoothly. "We'd appreciate a response within the week." She walked to the back room. She did not run. She closed the door, put both hands on the work table and breathed. Then she took off her apron, told Herschel through the door that she was taking the afternoon for a personal matter, and walked out of the store. She went to find Caleb. He was not at the stable. He was not at the hotel. She found him at the post office of all places picking up a letter, and when he saw her face he said nothing. He just walked with her back out to the street, and when they were out of earshot of everything, he said, "What happened?" She told him. She told him about the clause and the lawyer from Pueblo, and Herschel's smile, the one she should have kept watching for, and hadn't. Caleb listened without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Let me see the document." "I don't have it. It's in the store." "Did you read the date on the original?" 1876, she said. "I signed it in—" She stopped. Her mind went back. She had signed it on her third day in Silver Creek. October 14th, 1876. She had been standing at the counter because there was no chair, and she remembered because her feet hurt, and she remembered wishing she could sit down, and she remembered the pen and the date because she had written it herself. "Did you read the date on the document Church presented?" Caleb said. She had not looked at that date. She had looked at the clause. She had not looked at the date. "Go get it," Caleb said. "Tell Herschel you want a copy to review. He has to give you a copy. Church will know that he can't refuse it." He looked at her steadily. "And look at the date when you pick it up." She went back to the store. Herschel was behind the counter. Church was still there. She said, "I'd like a copy to review." Church produced one from his case. He had prepared copies, which meant this was not a spontaneous action, but a planned one, and she took it, and as she walked back out, she looked at the date at the top of the document. October 14th, 1876. But the clause, the exclusivity clause in the third paragraph, the ink was darker than the rest, slightly. Not dramatically, not in a way that screamed anything, but in the way of a thing added later and dried differently and matched as closely as possible to look original. She understood walking back down the boardwalk with the copy in her hands exactly what Herschel had done. He had inserted the clause into the document. Recently. In response to the Henderson lease, the Webb contract, the knowledge that she was leaving his arrangement and taking the most profitable thing he'd ever sold with her. She handed the copy to Caleb. He looked at the ink. He looked at her. "He forged it," she said. "Yes," Caleb said. The words sat between them in the cold October air. She thought about 6 years. She thought about 20 cents on the dollar and 35 after negotiation and the dock for lateness and the proprietary smile and all the many shapes that 6 years of undervaluation took. "What do I do?" she said. Caleb looked at the document. Then he looked at her with an expression that had no hesitation in it whatsoever. "You fight it," he said, "and you win." She looked at him. She thought about the woman who had sat in the back room with her hands on a ledger and decided that survival was enough. She thought about the woman who had walked into Tom Darby's hotel and named her price. She thought about the woman who had gone to the stable and said, "Stay because you want to." She was not the woman who let Herschel Pruitt take what was hers. "How?" she said. "You need the original document," Caleb said. "The one you actually signed. If he modified it, there's an original somewhere, either he has it or there's a county record." Land and commerce agreements in Colorado were being filed with the county clerk's office as of 1875. He was already moving forward. She could hear it, the same forward momentum she'd heard when he'd talked about the Henderson kitchen and the Webb contract. "We find the filed copy. We compare it to what Church produced. The ink will do the rest." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You've been in Silver Creek 3 weeks." "Yes," he said. "And somehow you know about Colorado commerce filing requirements from 1875. "I told you I spent 3 years in a property dispute," he said. "You learn what you need to learn." She almost laughed. Almost. She was too angry and too focused for it to fully arrive. "Let's go to the county clerk," she said. "Let's go to the county clerk," he agreed. They walked side by side down the main street of Silver Creek, past the general store where Herschel Pruitt was counting what he thought was a victory past the silver spur and the copper rail, and the hotel where she had signed a contract that was real and legal. And hers and Eliza Hart walked at a pace that matched her heart, fast and sure, and going somewhere specific, and thought about what she was going to do with everything she had built once this last obstacle was cleared from the road. She thought about it with the certainty of someone who has finally stopped asking permission. The county clerk's office was 2 blocks east. They pushed through the door, and Eliza stepped up to the counter and said in the voice she had developed for men who needed to understand she was serious, without being told twice, "I need to see every filed document associated with the Silver Creek General Store from October 1876. Today, please." The clerk looked at her. He looked at Caleb. He went to find the records. She stood at that counter with her hands flat on the wood, the same way she stood at her work table, the same steadying contact, the same grounded weight, and waited for what was coming next. The clerk came back with a folder, thin enough to suggest either very clean record-keeping or very selective filing, and he set it on the counter and opened it and said, "Everything we have on the Silver Creek General Store, October through December 1876. Eliza looked at the documents before she touched them. There were 4 pages. She picked up the first one and read it and set it aside. The second was a business registration. The third was a tax assessment. The fourth was a commercial employment agreement dated October 14, 1876. She looked at the ink. It was even. Consistent. The same darkness across every paragraph, every line, every clause, including the third paragraph, which in Herschel's version had ink slightly darker than the rest. The county copy had no exclusivity clause. The third paragraph in the filed document was a standard terms of employment paragraph. Wages, hours, notice period. Nothing about intellectual property. Nothing about recipes. Nothing about products developed on the premises. She held both documents side by side, Church's copy and the county's copy, and the difference was not subtle. It was not a matter of interpretation. It was the difference between a document and a forgery of that document, and anyone with functioning eyes and 2 minutes could see it. She looked at Caleb. He was looking at the documents with an expression of controlled satisfaction, contained precise, not triumphant. "There it is," he said quietly. "There it is," she agreed. She asked the clerk for a certified copy of the filed document. He stamped it and signed it, and charged her 15 cents, and she paid it without looking away from the 2 pages in her hand. She thanked him. She walked out. On the boardwalk she stopped. She stood with both documents and the certified copy, and she thought about 6 years. She thought about 20 cents on the dollar. She thought about the proprietary smile. She thought about a document that Herschel Pruitt had altered, physically altered with different ink to steal from her something she had built at 4:15 in the morning 6 days a week for the better part of a decade. She was not shaking. She noted that with some surprise. She was clear. "Church knows," she said. Caleb considered. "He may." Or Herschel presented the modified document as the original, and Church had no reason to question it. He paused. "Doesn't matter. Church's job was to present the document. The document is fraudulent. What happens next is not about Church." "What happens next," she said, "is I walk back into that store and tell Herschel Pruitt what I found. You want me to come?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "This is mine." He looked at her for a moment. He nodded once. "I'll be at the hotel," he said. She walked back to the general store with both documents under her arm, the certified copy and the forgery. She pushed the door open. Herschel was alone. Church had gone, presumably to wait for the outcome he thought was coming. Herschel looked up from the counter with his usual expression, and she walked straight to him and set both documents on the counter between them. "Look at the third paragraph," she said, "in both of them." He looked down. His expression did not change immediately. She watched it change slowly as he understood what he was looking at. The progression from confidence to assessment to the particular stillness of a man who has been caught and is calculating whether there is still a way out. "Eliza, the county clerk has the original," she said. "Filed October 14th, 1876. No exclusivity clause. No intellectual property language. Just wages and hours and a notice period." She kept her voice even. She had been keeping her voice even for 6 years with this man, and she was very good at it. "What you gave Church is a forgery. That's not a negotiating position. That's a crime." Herschel's hands came down flat on the counter. "You're making a serious accusation." "I'm reading 2 documents," she said. "The ink does the accusing." He was quiet for a moment. She had expected bluster, and she had prepared for it, and it did not come. What came instead was something she had not expected, not from Herschel Pruitt, who had never in 6 years shown her anything that resembled honesty, a kind of deflation. The air going out of something that had been puffed up a long time. "I built this store," he said. 22 years. "I know," she said. "You walked in with nothing. I gave you a kitchen and a market and 6 years of steady income. You gave me 20 cents on the dollar and called it generosity," she said. "And I am not ungrateful for what was genuine in it. You gave me a start when I needed one, and I know that." She held his gaze. "But what you did with that document is not something I'm going to overlook because of the 20 cents. And you knew that, which is why you had Church present it, instead of coming to me yourself." Herschel looked at the 2 documents. He looked at the counter. He looked at a point somewhere past her left shoulder that didn't have anything in it. "What do you want?" he said. "I want the original document returned to me," she said. "The one you modified. And I want a written statement that my recipes, my formulations, and my methods are entirely my property and have been since I developed them." She paused. "In exchange, I don't take what I have in my hand to the Pueblo County Sheriff." His jaw tightened. "That's blackmail." "It's a settlement," she said. "Blackmail would be if I asked for something I wasn't owed. I'm asking for what belongs to me and the ability to walk away with it without legal proceedings that would cost you considerably more than my recipes are worth to you." She held his gaze. "You're a businessman, Herschel. Do the math." The silence was long. She let it be long. She had learned from Caleb that silence was not empty. It was where the other person's decision lived, and filling it too early disrupted the process. Herschel went to the back office. She heard him open a drawer. She heard him come back. He put the original document on the counter, the version he had modified with the darker ink in the 3rd paragraph, and he stood there with his hand on it for a moment. Then he slid it toward her. "I'll have the statement drafted by tomorrow morning," he said. She picked up the document. "I'll send someone to collect it," she said. "I won't be back in this store after today." She walked out. She stood on the boardwalk for 10 seconds. She breathed. Then she walked to the hotel and found Caleb in the sitting room where she'd found him 3 days before, and she sat down across from him and put the document on the table between them. "He gave it up," she said. Caleb looked at the document, then at her. "How?" She told him. He listened the way he always listened, completely missing nothing. When she finished, he said, "You did that without raising your voice." "Raising my voice would have given him something to react to," she said. "I didn't want to give him anything to react to. I just wanted him to see what he was looking at." "That was well done," he said. She looked at him across the table. She had used that phrase, "that was well done," and she recognized it coming back from him. And in that recognition she felt something she had been building for 4 weeks come into focus so clearly that she almost had to look away from it. She didn't look away. "Caleb," she said. "Yes, I've been methodical about this," she said. "About you, about us, about every decision that touches on what I feel rather than what I think." She held his gaze. "I need to stop being methodical." He said nothing. He waited. "I want to marry you," she said. The room went completely quiet. She had not planned to say it. Or rather, she had been planning it in the way she planned most things, methodically and in advance, waiting for the right moment. And then Herschel Pruitt had committed fraud, and she had walked into the county clerk's office and walked out with the evidence, and walked into the general store and taken back what was hers. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, the method had dropped away, and what was left was just the true thing, unqualified. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. His face went through the same progression she had seen in Herschel's, but entirely different in content. Where Herschel's face had shown calculation and deflation, Caleb's showed something that arrived and settled and stayed. "I was going to ask you," he said. "I know," she said. "But I decided not to wait." "Why not?" "Because I've spent 6 years waiting to be certain before I acted," she said. "And I'm done with that system. I'm certain enough. I've been certain enough for 2 weeks, and I've been being methodical about it, and I'm finished being methodical." She looked at him. "Are you going to answer?" He said, "Yes." Just that. One word, the same plain directness he had used for everything since day one. And she felt it the way you feel something you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting, the specific quiet shock of an arrival. "All right," she said. "All right," he agreed. They sat in the hotel sitting room for another minute, and then they went and told Tom Darby, who shook both their hands and said he had seen it coming since the second morning, which Eliza chose not to examine too closely. They were married 2 weeks later by the same minister who ran Silver Creek's listing church in a ceremony that lasted 20 minutes and was attended by Pete Aldrich, who brought whiskey, and the hotel's entire kitchen staff, who brought nothing but, were very loud about their congratulations, which Eliza found she did not mind at all. She moved out of the back room of the general store on the same day she signed the Henderson lease extension. She moved into the ranch house 2 miles outside Silver Creek that Caleb had, it turned out, been quietly looking at for purchase since his 3rd week in town, a fact he disclosed the morning after the wedding, with the same matter-of-fact tone he used for all facts. And she looked at him across the breakfast table and said, "You were very sure of yourself." And he said, "I was sure of you. That's different," which she could not argue with and didn't try. The first week in the new house was the first week of her adult life that she had not woken up at 4:15 in someone else's kitchen. She woke up at 4:15 anyway. The body does not unlearn 6 years overnight, but she walked to her own kitchen in her own house and started her own fire, and the difference was not something she tried to put into words. She just stood there in the dark at 4:15 on that first morning and let herself feel it without qualification. Caleb woke up at 5:30 and came into the kitchen and said, "You've been up an hour." "I woke up at 4:15, she said. "You don't have to do that anymore." "I know." She handed him coffee. "I wanted to." He took the coffee. He understood immediately. She saw it in the way he looked at the kitchen, and then back at her, that this was not about habit. It was about a woman who had baked in other people's spaces for 6 years, standing in her own space and choosing to be there. He sat down at the table and left her to it. That was November. By December, the Henderson kitchen was operational. She had hired 2 women from the settlement to help with production. Agnes Cole, who was 22 and fast with her hands, and Ruth Maddox, who was 48, and had been baking longer than Eliza had been alive, and had very specific opinions about the temperature of butter that turned out to be completely correct. Eliza managed them the way she'd learned to manage herself, with clear expectations and actual respect for the work, which was not a complicated management philosophy, but proved to be rare enough that both women stayed. The first Thursday delivery to the stage depot went without problems. 72 pies, 2 varieties wrapped and boxed and loaded before the 9 o'clock stage. Marcus Webb sent a letter the following week. The Denver hotels had sold out on the first day, and he was requesting an additional variety and an increase to 90 pies per week. She sent back a letter agreeing to the 3rd variety and requiring 90 days before she could commit to the volume increase, because she had learned from Caleb not to commit to production levels before she had the capacity confirmed. She was learning from Caleb constantly, which was something she had not expected. Not that he would have things to teach her, but that learning from someone would feel like this. Not diminishment, like expansion. He was learning from her too. He was learning the interior logic of a business built on something made by hand, the way quality was a living thing that required constant tending and couldn't be automated away without losing what it was. He was learning that the relationships she had built with Tom Darby and Pete Aldrich and the mining foreman were not just contracts but reputations, and that reputation was slower to build and faster to lose than any other asset. He was learning her specifically, the way she thought, the way she argued, the way she went quiet when she was working through something hard and noisy when she had already worked through it. He said to her one evening, watching her go through the ledger, "You've never had anyone to think out loud to before." "No," she said without looking up. "Is it useful?" "Extremely," she said. "Don't stop being available for it." He smiled. A real one this time, full unguarded, the kind she had been collecting since the first almost smile on day 4, and had grown increasingly grateful for with each new instance. "I'll make a note of it," he said. January brought the cold that Silver Creek was known for, the kind that came off the peaks with no discussion, and settled over the valley, and stayed. The ranch house was solid, which she had checked before they moved in, and which Caleb had also checked independently before he'd put down money, and they had both done this without telling the other, and discovered it simultaneously, and then looked at each other and said nothing, because there was nothing to say about 2 people who both checked the insulation before they trusted a structure. The cold brought something else. A letter. It came in the first week of January, postmarked from Pueblo, and it was from Garrett Church. She opened it at the kitchen table while Caleb was outside. She read it once. She put it down. She picked it up and read it again. Church was not writing to threaten. He was writing to apologize. He wrote that he had discovered after the fact that the document Herschel Pruitt had presented to him had been modified before it was given to him. He had not known this at the time. He wrote that he had confronted Pruitt about it when he became aware of the discrepancy between what he'd been told the document contained and what the county record showed. He wrote that Herschel Pruitt had in the intervening weeks sold the Silver Creek General Store to a buyer from Denver and left town. Herschel Pruitt had sold the store and left Silver Creek. She sat with that for a long moment. She thought about 20 cents on the dollar. She thought about the proprietary smile. She thought about 6 years of serving someone else's arrangement in someone else's kitchen, and the very specific way that particular compression had shaped her without her knowing it was shaping her. She did not feel relief exactly. She felt the particular closure of a chapter that had needed closing, not dramatically, not with fanfare, just the quiet fact of a door that had stood open for 6 years, finally definitely shut. Caleb came in from outside and saw the letter, and she told him. He read it himself. He set it down. "He ran," Caleb said. "He ran," she agreed. "You had enough to take him to court." I know. She looked at the letter. I'm glad I didn't have to. Are you? He looked at her with the careful attention. Or are you glad it's over? She thought about the difference. Both, she said. But mostly the second one. He nodded. He understood. He always understood the thing underneath the thing which she had stopped being surprised by and started relying on, and the relying no longer felt like exposure. It felt like having somewhere solid to put her weight. February arrived with the first sign that what she was building was something larger than she had planned for. Tom Darby came to the Henderson kitchen on a Tuesday morning with a man in a suit she didn't recognize and said, "Eliza, this is Gerald Fitch. He manages 6 properties for the Mountain Pacific Hotel Group." Gerald Fitch had arrived in Silver Creek specifically to find her. Marcus Webb had emerged, had been talking. The pies from the Beaumont properties were becoming something that hotel guests asked about, not just ate, but remembered and mentioned and requested again. The Mountain Pacific Group wanted to discuss a contract. She said, "Sit down, Mr. Fitch. I'll make coffee." She made the coffee. She sat across from him. She listened to his terms, and she asked 8 questions, and she sent him back to his hotel with a counteroffer in writing that was 20% higher than his starting proposal, and she told him she'd need an answer within the week because she was considering a competing inquiry. She was not considering a competing inquiry, but Gerald Fitch didn't know that. He came back in 4 days with a number that met hers within 5% and a contract ready to sign. She took 2 days to review it, genuinely. Review it line by line with Caleb going through the legal language, and she signed it on a Thursday morning in the Henderson kitchen, while Agnes was rolling dough at the next table, and Ruth was opining about butter temperature, and the smell of 2 ovens running filled the whole building with something that was in the most precise and practical sense of the word hers. That evening at the ranch house, she told Caleb what the new contract added to the annual revenue. He looked at the number. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You need to think about a 3rd oven." She looked at him. "I've been thinking about a 3rd oven since January. And a 4th employee. I've been looking at a 4th employee since February." He looked at her with that expression, the one she had named privately, the recognition look, the one he wore when she arrived somewhere he'd expected her. "You've already done all of this," he said. "I've done the numbers," she said. "I needed the contract before I could commit." "When do you want to start?" She said, "Monday." He said, "I'll have the oven ordered by Friday." She looked at him across the table. She thought about October 4 months ago, the woman at the 4:15 morning who had called efficiency the shape of her life and meant it, who had held the world at the exact distance required to function without being touched. She thought about all the ways that woman had been surviving. She thought about the difference between surviving and this. "Caleb," she said. He looked up from the ledger. "I need to tell you something I should have said earlier." He waited. "When I asked you to stay," she said, "in the stable that afternoon, I said I wanted to stop keeping you at a distance. And I meant it. But I was still afraid." She looked at him directly. "I'm not afraid anymore. I want you to know that, not because things are easier or more certain they're not, but because fear was the reason for the distance, and the reason is gone." She held his gaze. "You're the reason it's gone." Caleb set down the pen. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the very first morning across the counter of the general store with the walnut pie between them, but with none of the unknowing in it, with all the knowing instead. "I know," he said. "You know," she repeated. "I've watched you stop being afraid for 4 months," he said. "I know exactly when it started, and I know exactly what it looked like, and I have been—" He paused, choosing very glad to see it. She picked up her coffee. She held the cup. She thought about the 4th column in the ledger that had no name in any accounting system, the one that had started in October, with a man sitting at a stool and ordering walnut pie, and saying things nobody had ever said to her before. She had a name for it now. She had known the name for a while. She had been letting herself know it gradually, the way she did everything that mattered, carefully, completely, and on her own terms. She did not say it out loud. She did not need to. It lived in the kitchen she walked into at 4:15 every morning by choice. It lived in the ledger with its 4 columns. It lived in the Henderson building where 2 women who called her by her first name were making something real. It lived in every signed contract and every honest negotiation and every moment she had spent in the last 4 months being larger than she had allowed herself to be for 6 years. Love, she had discovered, was not something that announced itself. It was something you found already built inside the life you were constructing. Load-bearing and quiet, as essential as the foundations of a thing, and as easy to miss until you looked directly at it. She looked directly at it. She set down her coffee. She opened the ledger to a fresh page. She had a 3rd oven to plan for, and a 4th employee to hire, and a Mountain Pacific contract to begin fulfilling. And all of it was hers. Earned, built, chosen, real. She picked up the pen. Outside Silver Creek settled into its winter dark, and inside the ranch house 2 miles from the edge of it, the lamp burned steady, and the ledger filled with the careful arithmetic of a life that was, by any honest measure, everything it had taken courage to become. N.A. Friday in March, which was also the day Marcus Webb sent a second letter. Eliza read the letter standing at the Henderson kitchen counter, while Agnes and Ruth were cleaning up from the morning run, and she read it with the particular stillness that came over her when information arrived that required real processing before reaction. Marcus Webb was not writing about pies. He was writing about a conversation he'd had with a man named Daniel Cross, who was the regional purchasing director for the Pacific Continental Hotel Group, the largest hotel chain west of the Mississippi, and who had eaten an Eliza Hart pie at the Beaumont in Denver, and then eaten a second one, and then asked Webb directly and specifically who made them and where they came from. Daniel Cross wanted a meeting, not a letter, not a proposal sent through Webb. A direct meeting in Silver Creek at her convenience. She set the letter down. She picked it up again. Pacific Continental had 43 properties. She had done the arithmetic before she'd finished the second paragraph the way she always did arithmetic automatically, the way breathing was automatic, and the number she arrived at was not a business number. It was a different category of number entirely. It was the kind of number that changed what a thing was. She walked to the ranch house at noon. Caleb was working the south fence line, and she went out to him instead of waiting, which had become something she did now without thinking, going toward what she needed, rather than waiting for it to come to her. He saw her coming, and he read her face at 50 yards, which she had stopped being surprised by. She handed him the letter. He read it. He handed it back. Pacific Continental, he said. 43 properties, she said. He looked at her. Can you produce at that volume? Not with what I have now, she said. Not even close. She looked at the letter. I'd need a building 4 times the size of Henderson. I'd need 8 ovens minimum. I'd need a full staff, not 2 women, 12. I'd need a distribution arrangement that goes beyond the Thursday stage because the Thursday stage can't handle that volume. That's a very large leap, he said. I know. Do you want to take it? She looked at him. The question was not, do you think you can? He never asked her that because he had already answered it to his own satisfaction and saw no reason to revisit it. The question was, what she wanted. He always came back to what she wanted, which she had learned was not a courtesy. It was a genuine belief that her wanting was the most relevant piece of information in any situation that pertained to her life. I don't know yet, she said, which was the most honest answer and the only one she would give him. Then find out, he said. Meet with Cross. See what he's actually proposing before you decide what you want. He turned back to the fence. You're good at that. She wrote to Marcus Webb that afternoon. She said she was available the following Thursday. Webb wrote back by return. Writer Cross had already been notified he would be in Silver Creek Wednesday evening, meeting Thursday morning. He had been in Denver waiting. The man had been waiting in Denver. She told Agnes and Ruth about the meeting the next morning. Agnes said, Pacific Continental. My cousin works at one of their hotels in San Francisco. Ruth said nothing for a moment. Then she said, How many ovens are we talking about? And that was the question Eliza had expected from Ruth, which was why Ruth was essential. I don't know yet, Eliza said. Thursday. Ruth went back to her butter. Caleb asked her that evening, Are you nervous? No, she said. He waited. Yes, she said. Not about the meeting. About what comes after the meeting if the meeting goes the way I think it's going to go. What do you think comes after? She put down the ledger. I think Daniel Cross is going to make me an offer that is very large, she said. And I think the offer is going to require me to decide how big I want this to be. And that decision... She stopped. She started again. I started baking to survive. I expanded to live. Every step from the hotel contract to the Mountain Pacific deal was a step toward something better. But this is a different kind of step. This changes what the business is. Fundamentally. She looked at him. And I need to know what I think about that before Thursday morning. Caleb picked up his coffee. He said, "What are you afraid it changes?" She had been waiting for that question without knowing she'd been waiting for it. "I'm afraid it changes what it feels like," she said. "Right now I know every pie that leaves the Henderson kitchen. I know Agnes's work and Ruth's work and my own work. I know the quality. I can stand behind it." She paused. "If the volume becomes what Pacific Continental needs, I can't know that anymore. I manage people who bake pies I've never touched. And the quality becomes a system instead of a person," Caleb said. "Yes. That's a real problem," he said. "Not a small one." She looked at him. "Most people would tell me I was overthinking it. That the money answers the question." "The money is not the question," Caleb said. "The question is what kind of business you want to run. Money is just the consequence." He set down his cup. "What would you need the system to look like so that the quality was still yours, even if the hands weren't?" She thought about that. She thought about it seriously, following it forward the way she followed all serious things, consequence by consequence, seeing what held. A documented process. Specific standards at every stage. A testing protocol for every batch. Someone whose only job was quality rather than production. The recipes written down for the first time in her life, not because she was afraid of losing them, but because writing them down was the act of transmitting them accurately rather than approximately. "I could build that," she said slowly. "I know you could," he said. "The question is whether you want to." She picked up the ledger. She put it down. She stood up and walked to the window and looked at the dark outside the Colorado dark that was complete and enormous and had stopped feeling like exposure 18 months ago. "I want to," she said. Thursday morning. Daniel Cross was a man of 52 who had the efficient manner of someone who managed complexity for a living and had gotten very good at identifying what he needed before the conversation about it was halfway done. He sat across from Eliza at the table in the Henderson kitchen she had chosen, the kitchen deliberately. Not Tom Darby's hotel dining room, not a rented office, and she watched him take in the space and the running ovens and the organized production flow, and she could see him adding things to a column in his head. "You've built something serious here," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have. Marcus Webb tells me you started with a glass case in a general store." "A glass case and 20 cents on the dollar," she said. 18 months ago. Cross looked at her for a moment with an expression that was purely professional. She was not a person to him. Yet, she was a potential supplier, and she respected that because it was honest. "Pacific Continental is looking for a signature bakery item across all properties," he said. "Something that distinguishes us from the Mountain Pacific experience and the Beaumont experience. Right now, our dessert program is generic. I want it to not be generic." He put his hands on the table. "I've had your pie at 3 separate properties now. It is not generic." "Thank you," she said. "What I'm proposing is an exclusive contract," he said. "Pacific Continental properties only. In exchange for exclusivity, we guarantee volume minimum 200 units per week at full rollout, scaling up from 50 in the first quarter." He named the price per unit. Eliza kept her face still. The price per unit was 30% above what she was charging Mountain Pacific. The volume at full rollout was more than double her current combined output. She said, "Exclusive means ending my current contracts." "Yes. Mountain Pacific, the Beaumont Group." "We would compensate for the transition period," Cross said. 90 days of dual supply while you transition away from the existing contracts. She looked at him. I need to ask you something directly. Please, he said. If I build out to meet your volume and your exclusivity terms, and we operate under this contract for 2 years, and then Pacific Continental decides to source differently, or the contract is not renewed, I have a facility built for your volume and no other clients. She held his gaze. That is a significant risk to absorb on my end. Cross looked at her with an expression that shifted from assessment to something closer to actual attention. What would make that risk acceptable to you? A 5-year term, she said. Not 2. With a penalty clause for early termination that covers 18 months of guaranteed volume at the contracted price. She paused. And I retain the right to supply non-competing markets, meaning not hotel properties, but direct retail or wholesale arrangements that don't conflict with your distribution. Cross said nothing for a moment. He was doing the math she'd done before he arrived. She could see it happening. The non-competing carve-out is workable, he said. The penalty clause, I'd need to go to 18 months at contracted volume rather than guaranteed price, which is our standard exposure limit. He looked at her. The 5-year term I can agree to. She said, I need 3 days to review the written version before I sign anything. Expected, he said. I'll have my attorney draft it today. They shook hands. Cross left. Agnes, who had been quietly working at the far end of the kitchen and had been extremely obviously not listening, turned around, the moment the door closed, and said, Did you just negotiate a 5-year exclusive with Pacific Continental? I negotiated the terms, Eliza said. I haven't signed anything yet. Agnes stared at her. You're very calm about this. I'll be calm or not calm after I read the contract, Eliza said. Right now I need to make the Thursday pies. Agnes turned back to the table. Under her breath, just audible, She's made of something different than the rest of us. Eliza heard it. She filed it in the same place. She filed everything that came from the outside world about who she was. Not for ego, but for the record. The record of a woman who had been invisible for 6 years, and was now by a series of decisions that had each required more courage than the one before someone that a man from the largest hotel chain west of the Mississippi had traveled to Silver Creek specifically to find. She reviewed the contract with Caleb that evening. He went through every clause the way he went through every document that touched their business, slowly, completely asking questions at the places where the language was doing more than one thing at once. He found 2 clauses that needed revision. She sent a letter back to Cross's attorney with the proposed revisions. The attorney's response came Saturday morning, 1 revision accepted as written, 1 modified to something she could live with. She signed on Saturday afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table in the ranch house with the pen in her hand and the contract in front of her, and she thought about October of last year, the glass case, and the 20 cents, and the 4:15 mornings that had no destination except the next one. She thought about the woman who had said that hope was expensive. She thought about armor. She signed her name, Eliza Hart Boone. Both names because she had decided when she married Caleb that she was not trading one name for another, she was adding to what she already was. She put the pen down. She looked at the signed contract. Then she went out to the south pasture where Caleb was working, and she said, "Done." He turned. He looked at her face. "Good," he said. "I need to write to Mountain Pacific today," she said. "And the Beaumont Group. I know. Do you want help drafting it?" "No," she said. "I know what to say." She wrote both letters that evening. They were honest and direct and gave full notice with the 90-day transition period and offered referrals to 2 other suppliers she knew of who could partially fill the gap. She was not obligated to provide the referrals. She did it because these were relationships she had built with integrity, and she intended to close them the same way. Tom Darby came to find her Monday morning. He had heard. Silver Creek was a small town, and news traveled at the speed of Sunday services. He sat at the counter in the Henderson kitchen and accepted a cup of coffee and said, "Pacific Continental exclusive. How does that feel?" "Ask me in 5 years," she said. He laughed. He shook her hand. He said, "Your parents would have." And then he stopped because he realized he hadn't known her parents, and he said, "I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that." "It's all right," she said. And she meant it, which was itself something the fact that a mention of her parents could land without the old compression in her chest. "I think they would have been very confused by all of it," she said. And then proud. In that order. She hired 6 more people in the spring. She chose them the way she chose everything now, with clear criteria, honest expectations, and the specific respect for the work that she had learned was not actually common, and was, it turned out, the single most important factor in whether someone showed up every morning wanting to do the job well. By May, the Henderson kitchen had expanded into the adjacent building, which she had leased in March, with the confidence of someone who knew the direction of travel and had stopped needing to be certain of the destination before she moved. Ruth ran the production floor. Agnes managed quality, which was the position Eliza had thought through in the conversation with Caleb, the person whose only job was to know every batch, and Agnes had turned out to have an almost alarming eye for inconsistency that Eliza trusted completely. Eliza ran everything else which was considerable, and she ran it from the Henderson kitchen and from the ranch house table, and occasionally from horseback between the two, because some of the best thinking she did was in motion. The baby arrived in June. She had known since March. She had told Caleb in March at the kitchen table in the same direct way she told him everything. Just the fact, stated plainly. He had gone very still for a moment, and then he had looked at her with an expression she had no precedent for in her catalog of his expressions. Something open and warm and completely unguarded, something she felt in her chest like a struck bell. He had said, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "I'm going to keep working." "I know," he said. "Ruth can manage the kitchen floor through the last month." "I know," he said again. "I need you to not treat me like I'm fragile." "I've never treated you like you're fragile," he said, with the quiet certainty of a man stating a fact about himself he was entirely confident in. She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said. "You haven't." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "We're going to be very good at this," she said. He turned his hand over and held hers. "Yes," he said. "We are." The baby was a girl. They named her Clara, after no one in particular, and after everything in general. The name had come to Eliza in the middle of a 4:15 morning, 2 weeks before the birth, in the specific quiet of a kitchen she had built herself. And it had felt right in the way that things felt right when they arrived, without being searched for. Clara was 3 weeks old the first time Eliza went back to the Henderson kitchen. She brought her in the morning carrier that Caleb had made from canvas and leather, and spent an embarrassing amount of time perfecting which Eliza had found quietly devastating in the best possible way. Agnes looked at the baby and then at Eliza and said, "You couldn't wait another week." "I could have," Eliza said. "I didn't want to." She looked around the kitchen. "What did I miss?" "Ruth adjusted the walnut recipe," Agnes said. Eliza looked at Ruth across the kitchen. Ruth did not look up from what she was doing. "The sugar ratio was 3% too high," Ruth said. "I corrected it." "Was it?" Eliza asked. "It was," Ruth said. "It is now correct." Eliza thought about this. She thought about the fact that 18 months ago she had built a system and hired a woman who knew more about butter temperature than she did, and the system was working exactly as intended. It was carrying the quality forward without her being physically present for every moment of it. The pie that went to Pacific Continental Properties this week was as good as the pie she had made herself in October of last year. "Good," she said. "Thank you, Ruth." Ruth nodded once. She went back to the butter. The first year of the Pacific Continental contract passed. The volume scaled as planned. The quality held. She monitored it through the testing protocol, through Agnes, through the quarterly visit she made to 3 Denver properties to eat the pie herself and compare it to what she knew it should be. It held. The system held. What she had built was carrying itself. The penalty clause was never triggered. The 5-year term was reached and renewed not once, but twice, the second renewal negotiated by Eliza at terms 20% better than the first, because by the third cycle, she knew what she had, and so did they, and the leverage had shifted accordingly. Clara grew up in a house built on two things that Eliza had once believed were incompatible: work and love, ambition and belonging, the life built by her own hands, and the life shared willingly with another person. She grew up watching her mother at 4:15 in the morning by choice, and watching her father check the fence line the same way every evening because good work required consistency, and watching both of them sit at the kitchen table with the ledger between them and the lamp lit and the conversation going. The way all their best conversations went, honestly, directly, without performance or management. Two people who had learned that being known was not a threat, but the only real foundation for anything. When Clara was 7, she asked her mother where the business had started. Eliza thought about the glass case. She thought about the 20 cents. She thought about a man who had walked in and ordered walnut pie and said, "I don't just want a pie." "It started with one customer," she said, "who told me my work was worth more than I was getting for it." Clara thought about this. "And then what happened?" "And then I decided to believe him," Eliza said. "And everything followed from that." Was it scary? Eliza looked at her daughter, 7 years old, with Caleb's directness and her own relentlessness, a combination that she suspected would be spectacular and occasionally exhausting. "Yes," she said, "it was very scary." "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." "Why?" She thought about the armor. She thought about efficiency. She thought about 6 years of pressing things down and calling it survival. And the morning in October when a stranger had sat at a stool and looked at her like she was the most interesting thing in the room. Not because she was beautiful or convenient, but because her work was exceptional and her situation was unjust, and he was a man who could not walk past that without saying something. She thought about the specific quality of being seen by someone who wanted nothing from you except the truth. "Because staying scared was costing me more than moving forward," she said. "Everything I was afraid of losing, I was already losing it by holding on too tight. The safety I thought I had was just a smaller version of the life I was supposed to be living." She looked at her daughter. "When I understood that the fear didn't go away, but it stopped being the reason." Clara thought about this with the serious face she brought to all serious things. Then she said, "Is that why you kept Daddy's name when you got married? Because it was adding, not trading?" Eliza stared at her. "Who told you that?" "Nobody," Clara said. "I figured it out." A pause. "Daddy told me you signed the Pacific Continental contract with both names, and he said it was the most like you thing he'd ever seen." Eliza thought about Caleb saying that, and she felt at 33 years old, with a business that employed 14 people and a contract that ran for 5 years, and a daughter who reasoned like a small, slightly unnerving attorney. The exact same thing she had felt the first time he'd called her by her name across a counter. The specific shock of being known. It had not diminished. In 8 years, it had not diminished by 1 degree. If anything, it had deepened, the way things deepened when they were real, not fading, but settling, becoming structural, becoming the thing everything else was built on. Caleb came in from outside and found them at the table and looked at Eliza's face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing," she said. Clara was asking about the beginning. He sat down. He looked at Clara. "What did she tell you?" "That it was scary and she did it anyway," Clara said. "That's accurate," Caleb said. "Were you scared?" Clara asked him. He thought about it honestly. "I was scared she'd say no," he said. "The first time I walked into that store and saw that the best pie I'd ever eaten was selling for 20 cents on the dollar, and the woman who made it was invisible to every person in the room, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I was afraid she'd say no." Clara looked between her parents. "But she didn't." "She didn't," Caleb said. "She said yes." "Eventually," he said, and glanced at Eliza with the contained, almost smile she had been collecting for 8 years and had not once found ordinary. Eliza picked up her coffee. She looked at the kitchen. the kitchen of the ranch house that Caleb had been looking at before she knew he existed. The kitchen she had walked into every 4:15 morning by choice for 8 years. The kitchen where the ledger lived on the table and the lamp made the same warm circle. And outside was the ranch that had started as a gamble between two people and was now something so solid she could feel it underfoot without thinking about it. She looked at her daughter. She looked at her husband. She thought about the woman in the back of the general store who had baked to survive and told herself survival was enough, and pressed every other feeling flat and called it efficiency. And she thought about what that woman would have said if you'd told her what was coming. She thought she would have said, "I don't believe you." Not because it was impossible, because she hadn't yet learned that the thing she was protecting herself from was the very thing that made the life worth living. You had to stop holding on to the small version before you could have the real one. She had stopped. She had said yes, not just to Caleb, not just to the hotel contract or the Henderson lease or the Pacific Continental term, but to herself, to her own size, to the full, honest scope of what she was capable of when she stopped managing it down to something that couldn't be taken. Everything worth having in her life had come from that one decision, and she had made it not because she was certain, not because the fear was gone, not because someone had guaranteed the outcome, but because a man had walked into a store and told her the truth about her own worth, and she had been brave enough for the first time in 6 years to believe him. Eliza Hart Boone had built a life that began with one pie in a glass case.